We look over now to our Sounders season in review, and we'll similar blueprint to what we did with our Mariners here. We've got our list of sort of superlatives. We look at season in review. MVP, I went with Nico Ladero. I know that the Sounders official the Sounders official, their website and the team went with Stephen Fry. But, with Ladero in the midfield, obviously the loss of João Paulo to injury in the CCL final is big. Nico was still able to, after, relatively several disappointing showings throughout the year, Nico was able to lead the team in points in general with goals plus assists added up. So, that's impressive to note, just knowing that there were a lot of performances for him that weren't really that good. There were a lot of times where I was wondering what was going on in the midfield, what the direction was, who's going to really step up and take form there. There were a lot of shifted around lineups, a lot of times with different folks in and out of the midfield. But for Nico to lead in points, I feel like it's still a big deal. So that's why I wanted to give him that value. So again, I know there's a lot of disappointment around the Sounders season, but I think Nico helped a good amount in here. I know that there are some that have called for him to be removed from the team or see him as a potential departure. I doubt that, but hey, we'll see. It's a big offseason. We look at Defender of the Year. I did this in my article of the Sounders season in review. I went with Jackson Reagan. Now, I went with Jackson Reagan for a couple reasons, but mainly, his youth and the value that he brought as a center back is huge for this team. Obviously, with the size, he kind of reminds you of a Chad Marshall almost. I know that some have seen him as someone that needs to be loaned out. I'm sure that he needs to get some more experience. But I think that, and the Sounders officially went with Yamar for this award, but with the age and the value that Reagan brought, I know that he didn't start a ton, but that's where I went with that, is sort of the age and the potential of this, what we might see from Reagan going forward as one of these center backs, and how valuable he could be next year, let alone as the years go on. So that's where I went with that. If you went with Yamar, I don't blame you. He would probably be my alternate option here, but I went with Jackson Reagan mostly for the youth and the potential. That's where I was going there with that. We look at Newcomer of the Year, and it's hard to really pick anybody outside of Albert Rusnak. I know that there was criticism of him throughout the year. People expected more just in general in terms of scoring or other things on the pitch. Some just saw he was taking up space. But if you look at some of the underlying stats, some of the stuff that maybe the casual fan wouldn't notice, he was pretty valuable to this club. And I think a tough amount of it was that he was playing out of position for the Sounders with the injury to João Paulo. So I think if you look at it, that loss to João Paulo really kind of messed things up for Seattle. And I'm imagining that with João Paulo back next year, to be able to have a consistent midfield, to be able to rotate those guys and have them play in their real positions, will be very valuable to this team, and why we could see such a big resurgence next year, perhaps a bounce back sort of year for Rusnak and for this club. So it's hard to go with anybody else in the newcomer department outside of Albert. You could go. I know that. No, yeah, there's just not many there. It's mostly returning 11 from the year before, which is a good thing in many ways, but also tough. So Went with Rusnak there. To the highlights of it of this past season, it's hard to for anything else to be number one outside of CCL. Um, it's tough to look at this game and fully kind of grasp it. I'm sure for a lot of people because of the fact that there was the disappointment in the MLS regular season, and you weren't able to do much at all after you had won CCL because there was talk of the CCL hangover. And then even a few months after that, you were still disappointing. So it's like, is this hangover still happening, or did you just never find your footing in general in MLS regular season? Even before they had won CCL, I know they were dealing with it in the early stages of the MLS regular season. They were going through the tournament still, but you never really found it. Never really found it. Um, but some of the highlights, regardless, the 2-1 win here in Seattle over Charlotte. Charlotte was still relatively new in their inaugural season, coming off of a pretty solid stretch. They take the first goal, and then Seattle's able to answer back with two in the late stages of the match, including an absolute rocket from Raul Ruiz. And then the late season win over Austin. I could have gone with a few other things. The 4-0 thrashing over Vancouver. Uh, you know, but I went with this win over Austin late because Austin, one of the top teams in all of the league. I think they're still in the playoffs. I'll check that while we're going through this. But Austin's a team that, again, top in the West, one of the top teams in the West. You're kind of hanging on by a thread at this point in time when this game happens. Yes, Austin is in the conference finals. They'll play LAFC. Wow, jeez. But point being, yeah, so you play one of the conference final contenders and you beat them late in the season to keep your tiny thread of hope alive for the playoffs. In thrashing fashion too. I believe this game was 3-0. So I think Raul Ruiz had a brace. This was a big game. So there's your highlights. It was a tough year, but in any season there's going to be highlights to it. Biggest sort of regret. I know you can't really control this as much, but losing João Paulo was huge. So it's tough to look at the season and not think that João Paulo didn't have this really negative impact because of the injury that happened. I mean, it's not his fault. I know that comes out weird, but it's not his fault. But, with having to have Rusnak play out of position, you lose the value that he brings on set pieces. Seattle was horrible on set pieces this year. Weren't really able to build out of the midfield relatively at all, you know. Um, you look at the meaning of MVP, those three letters, most valuable player. I thought that João Paulo should have won it last year, and I think this year only proves that. You see how much value he brings to the team, how he holds his team together, how he's able to orchestrate and be the conductor. And he lost that. So if João Paulo is able to stay healthy through the year, who knows? Who knows what we're talking about? Maybe Seattle is still here. Maybe we're talking about them in the conference finals. I don't know. So, yeah, we won't know. So we look at areas to improve here. You might need a new finisher. Not new as in get rid of Raul Ruiz. Raul is Raul. You're not going to get rid of him. But you need someone else to add in and contribute there. Jordan Morris had an okay year, but he really wasn't able to finish as much as you'd like and didn't record as many of the stats you would have liked. Christian Roldan was playing like an MVP throughout a good amount of the year. He's more of a midfielder, though, and not really like a finisher attacker. I put Leo Shu in here because maybe, this offseason he's really able to develop and become that guy. He was someone that had a lot of positives and negatives throughout this year. Brian Schmetzer reflected on that, and they want to see what they're going to do with him. But, he's still a young talent, young, fast, good-paced talent. Maybe it's from within. Sam Adeniran went on loan this year. Had a great year down with the Toma Defiance, but Seattle wanted to get him more of a challenge, so they sent him over to USL. Maybe it's from within, or maybe you do find a way to bring someone else in to help score goals for this club. Potential departures. This one's a little bit tough because the contract situations for a lot of the MLS are harder to find than putting it into MLB and like looking at Spot Track and finding the Mariners contracts and seeing who's up when. You know, but with Nuhu here, Nuhu's someone that's been talked about as a potential transfer target already. Primarily after he helped lock down Mo Salah in a World Cup qualifier. There was talk of him being sold after the season ends or after the World Cup. So maybe that's what happens. Maybe that takes place. That's kind of the idea. But if there's a potential departure, there's a most likely that we're looking at, it's going to be Nuhu. We look over to, and then here's this big question: is a lot of the fan base has brought up, is big change needed? No, I really don't think so. I think you need to really recenter yourself and take this off season to get back to basics of sorts, get JP back, get guys healthy. But this is a team that can accomplish a lot, and we know that. It's mostly the same 11. So I think getting that back and really being able to reassert yourself as the juggernaut that the MLS hates is not that far within reach, and don't think you need to make major changes because of it to get that. So we look at the 2023 season prediction. I believe you can make another deep playoff run this upcoming year. I'm not going to guarantee a title. I don't want to say that, but I really think that you recenter yourself, you get everybody back, you play a good amount of the season to get people healthy for playoffs. Secure a playoff berth first, but get people healthy for playoffs. I think you can do damage again, because it's been a few years since you were able to do that. You look at the 2020 season. The 2020 is weird, but the last time you won MLS Cup, you played Columbus, and that was just embarrassing. You wondered what was going on. A few years ago, you look at that season. Last season, not this past one, but the one before that, and Seattle gets knocked out in round one to Real Salt Lake. This past year, you won CCL, but at what cost? So I really do think that Seattle can get back to it. Playoffs wise, minimum, yes, I think they're making the playoffs. Deep playoff run, I think, is in the cards, but I can't guarantee you a title. So we look over at team-related notes. On the 19th, as I mentioned, the Sounders released their official team awards. Their picks: MVP and Humanitarian of the Year goes to Stefan Fry. Defender of the Year goes to Yamar, and Golden Boot for the most goals scored goes to Raul Ruidiaz. So congratulations to those three. We look at the Sounders' final record, sitting at 12 wins, 17 losses, and 5 draws, sitting at 11th in the Western Conference at 41 points. This is a big offseason. I don't think you need to make a ton of changes, as I said, but adding a piece here and there could really be the difference for this team, from just making the playoffs to potentially winning it all. So